Insecurities. We all got 'em. It doesn't matter who you are. There's always somebody out there stronger, faster, smarter, hell, even better looking than you. And we can't help it. We compare constantly, obsessing over what we don't have while completely overlooking what we do, what actually makes us unique, especially when you're the kind of guy who'd stick his neck out for his friends. Literally. When I was a kid, I had these really prominent white horizontal lines around my neck, making it look segmented like an accordion. Kind of a unique feature, sure, if you want to be generous about it, but it was something definitely not fun growing up with. Kids can be mean, and I got compared to a turtle constantly, always getting asked to stretch out my neck. It got even worse in 1982 thanks to a certain extraterrestrial that hit it big in the movies. And all of a sudden, I was getting asked to phone home non-stop. But it wasn't until a couple years later that my distinct physical feature finally landed me the nickname that would stick with me for the rest of my childhood. In 1984, Mattel released a certain heroic human periscope as part of Wave 3 of the Masters of the Universe toy line. And well, you can guess what I got called from that point on. But hey, at least I was called after a heroic warrior. Anyway, so I guess it's no surprise that my first impression of Mechaneck wasn't a very good one. But not for the reasons you'd think. Before I even saw the dude, his action feature was described to me by my older brother. That instead of a spring-loaded power punch, he could raise his head up with a twist of the waist. My brain just assumed his head flew clean off when he punched, like one of those rock'em sock'em robots, which struck me as rather lame. It wouldn't be until I actually saw his gimmick in, well, action that my stance on him softened significantly, which was a good thing, because not only did Mechaneck end up being one of the few figures I actually owned, I think I somehow had two of him. Anyway, from that point on, not only were Mechaneck and his twin brother a staple on my toy shelf, but whenever my friends and I played Masters of the Universe, I was always assigned to be Mechaneck. Never got to call dibs on He-Man. Story of my life. But enough's enough about me, yeah? Let's head into Mechaneck's neck of the woods, starting with where the hell he actually came from. And that would be from the mind of the legendary Masters of the Universe designer, the late, great Roger Sweet. He came up with a dude with a fully red upper body, yellow armor, matching yellow boots, and a yellow mace, topped off with a helmet, guess what color that was, that looked like someone crossbred a board game pawn token with a pair of ski goggles. A nod to his optics-focused gimmick. And his name was Spy-Man. Not the catchiest name in the book, but that'll do, pig. That'll do. For now. By the time the figure hit shelves in 1984, not only had the name Spy-Man been thankfully swapped out for the incredibly descriptive, punny name of Mechaneck. Get it? But the whole look had been overhauled too. A bright blue bodysuit, bulky red snap-on armor, an equally bulky helmet with huge reflective silver goggles matching his silver boots, and a very yellow mace. But more than the bright colors, it was the overall theme of clean, hard lines, angles, and geometric shapes. From his Devo-esque helmet to his triangular goggles, even his mace studded with diamond and rectangle-shaped studs that really made him stand out from the predominantly barbarian, creature-based themes of his predecessors. And that's all before we've even gotten to his actual action feature. Now, the neck gimmick itself, simply put, you twist his waist and his head goes up. Not in a rock'em sock'em robot sort of way, but like a periscope. The extra neck portion, neatly stored inside his torso, extends straight up to bring his head to new heights. On the surface, that seemed pretty basic, but over at Mattel, this was a big deal. Sure, they could have pulled off the cheap trick route with a simple push-pull friction mechanism, but that loosens up over time, and pretty soon his little gimmick stops defying gravity and just stays down. So designers Tony Rhodes and Larry Renger built an internal system where twisting the figure's waist doesn't just force the neck to extend upwards, it gives an actual structural support to keep it there. The design was ingenious enough for the time that Mattel filed an official patent for this exact mechanism, one of the very few MOTU action features the company ever bothered to legally protect. And finally, we have his weapon. That yellow mace most people would naturally write off as just a blunt melee weapon, which actually doubles as a telescope, thanks to a hole in the wide end. Honestly, it was a nice bit of design cohesion, going all the way back to his original Spy-Man concept, where the weapon was built specifically as a spy tool. This isn't just a guy who can spot enemies approaching from miles away. When they got right up to him, he can whack them on the heads too. Now, back in the day, the original source of info about these Masters of the Universe characters came in the form of the mini-comics packed in with each figure. And more often than not, that pack-in comic would actually introduce the character. The Terror of Triclops, the Menace of Trapjaw, He-Man meets Ram-Man. You get the point. But by the third wave of figures, I'm guessing with the toy line now a bona fide hit and the Filmation cartoon in full swing, Mattel didn't feel the need to properly introduce every character via the printed page anymore. So the mini-comics became less character specific and Mattel just started packing them in with whatever figures happened to be on the shelves. Which meant Mechaneck never got a proper spotlight issue, let alone an origin story in the mini-comics. In fact, his own toy got randomly packed in with 4 different titles. And of those 4, he actually appears in only 1. In He-Man and the Insect People, Mechaneck tags along with He-Man to free the insectile Kex people from Beastman. Nothing groundbreaking, but worth noting because in one panel, Mechaneck actually uses his ability not for spying, but in actual combat, using his extending head as a battering ram against one of the underground monsters they run into along the way. And given that hard-edged geometric helmet of his, why wouldn't he? To get to an actual origin story for Mechaneck, we have to look to another medium entirely, specifically the Filmation cartoon, where Mechaneck's story isn't just first told, but his whole personal circle gets expanded on. We get a family in the form of a son named Philip, and a future rival in a dude named Count Marzo. But before we get into Mechaneck's story proper, let's do a quick pivot and talk about Marzo. As far as the art of storytelling goes, the folks over at Filmation were no amateurs. It was pretty obvious to them that if Skeletor was the only villain across 130 episodes, he'd start looking pretty incompetent pretty fast, losing to He-Man week after week after week. And so the writers built out independent threats, warlords, demonic sorceresses, operating completely outside Skeletor's evil warriors. And that's how they landed on Marzo, an aristocratic, manipulative dark wizard with his own selfish localized ambitions. And Marzo's whole methodology revolved around manipulation, specifically manipulating kids. Whether it's de-aging and memory wiping his own nephew to snatch away the powerful Ring of Remembrance right as the guy was about to inherit it, or literally getting actual kids hooked on an addictive plant called the Black Nightmare to do his bidding. Yeah, this wasn't just some bonehead on a throne calling his henchmen boobs. This was one hella creepy dude, which naturally makes him the perfect villain for a certain heroic warrior who just happens to have a son of his own. As the story goes, years back, a pre-mechanical necked Mechaneck, already inexplicably going by the name and dressed the part, don't ask, and his son Philip are caught in a massive storm while up on Dragon Mountain. Philip gets swept away in the wind and lost, and Mechaneck himself is badly hurt, in the neck, of course, and passes out. He's found by Man-at-Arms, who nurses him back to health with a brand new mechanical neck that extends like a periscope. Seriously, wouldn't a neck brace have done the trick? Anyway, twist of all twists, Philip is alive and well, having landed in the clutches of, you guessed it, the last person on Eternia you'd want a lost kid running into, Count Marzo, who shockingly uses Philip as leverage to coerce Mechaneck into helping him kidnap King Randor and Queen Marlena, and seize the throne for himself. Mwahahaha. And while our hero refuses, he still manages to capture the king and queen anyway. And so Mechaneck, together with He-Man and the gang, tracks down Marzo's hidden lair and rescues the king, the queen, and Philip, with Mechaneck himself pulling off the actual save, extending his neck down into a pit to haul his son back up to safety. And as for Marzo, well, He-Man ends him. Just kidding. He escapes, but not before dropping a juicy bit of info about himself. That he's lived for thousands of years and might just outlive He-Man too. So, until next time, I guess. The point is, the good guys win and father and son are finally reunited. Oh, and somewhere in all this, Teela randomly scales a sheer cliff wall, nearly falls, and gets saved by Buzz-Off. Because apparently, that's the moral of the episode. To be careful where you walk, run, or climb. Fair, I guess, but given everything else that just happened, I feel like maybe don't get caught outside during a massive storm is the more useful takeaway. Anyway, because Mechaneck's toy was released right as the original Filmation series was already winding down, he only appeared in 3 episodes total, which is just as well since it turns out the animators never loved drawing him in the first place, thanks to all those sharp angular edges on his helmet and armor. Hey, have you tried to draw a straight line without any rulers? So once Filmation wrapped, the next time we'd see Mechaneck and the rest of the Masters of the Universe was in 2002's Reboot from Mike Young Productions, which, if you ask me, was an absolute godsend for the franchise. Not only did it bring He-Man and company back into the spotlight, it did it in style. Gorgeous anime-inspired animation, genuinely strong writing that pushed Eternia's world building forward, and real development for the characters who lived there, including Mechaneck. I remember being blown away by the new show, though at first it felt like the animators were trying a little too hard to amp up the coolness factor, with characters excessively twirling their weapons for extra posturing. Except, in Mechaneck's case, the mace twirling he did actually served a purpose. Facing off against the evil and sees everything Triclops, Mechaneck tosses his twirling mace high up into the air as a distraction, and while Triclops looks up, Mechaneck's neck springs into action, not just headbutting Triclops in the chest, but launching him a considerable distance away. Guess he didn't see that coming. I already knew Mechaneck used his ability offensively before, but this was the moment it actually clicked for me. Huh, that's actually kind of badass. Because yeah, the 2000X series didn't just let his neck shoot straight up anymore. Now it stretched infinitely, in any direction he wanted. Basically Mr. Fantastic or Elastic Man, if all they could stretch was their neck. Extreme mace twirling skills, and an infinitely stretching neck. On paper, this was one of the most upgraded, capable versions of Mechaneck yet. Except, he didn't see it that way. Despite all those upgrades, this version of Mechaneck was saddled with a crippling inferiority complex. Convinced he was the master stuck with the lamest power, good for nothing but reconnaissance. Surrounded by heavy hitters, he saw his own ability as passive, cowardly, and even useless. That's the entire premise of Mechaneck's lament. During a battle at Castle Grayskull, Mechaneck injures his neck in another clash with Triclops and gets benched to recon duty while the others fight. Back at the palace, depressed and convinced he's obsolete, not helped by Man-at-Arms literally inventing a machine that could replace him, Mechaneck wanders off and runs into a harmless-looking old hermit on a raft. And when I say old, I mean he looked thousands of years old. See where I'm going with this? So the old man, offers to grant Mechaneck real power. But first, he needs Mechaneck to retrieve an amulet from the Sands of Fire as payment. Mechaneck doesn't hesitate. He tracks down the amulet using his stretching abilities and hands it right over. And with his beloved amulet finally back in his hands, the old man transforms because, shocker, the old man is Count Marzo. Years earlier, he'd attacked the Hall of Wisdom only to be defeated by Captain Miro, King Randor's own father, leading an army against him. He was left imprisoned in that frail old form ever since. Now, freshly repowered, Marzo's 2000X design isn't that aristocratic Filmation dandy anymore. This is a towering, long-haired, muscle-bound, abs exposed, battle-ready Dark Wizard. With his amulet in one hand and his sword in the other, Marzo takes down He-Man, then storms the royal palace. He floods the place with knockout gas courtesy of his hounds, taking out the rest of the Masters in one shot. The gas cloud is so thick and so engulfing that there's no seeing through it, let alone above it. Except, of course, the one guy on the team built exactly for this. Mekaneck stretches his neck up above the toxic haze, sneaks in on Marzo, and snatches the amulet right back with his mouth. Seriously, those are some strong chompers. He-Man then finishes the job by hurling the amulet out into the seas of Eternia, stripping Marzo of his power once again. And so Marzo's defeated, and Mekaneck walks away with a newfound appreciation for his own ability. But the show wasn't done with the Dark Wizard yet. Following the same trick Filmation used decades earlier, introducing random one-off villains to keep Skeletor from looking incompetent every week, MYP took it a step further and asked, what if all these random baddies actually teamed up? And I don't know, formed a council? A council of evil? United under Skeletor, this coalition, Marzo included, ambushes the Masters and takes them out one by one. And I'll give you one good guess on who Marzo specifically goes after. As close as they get to actually beating He-Man and company, the coalition eventually splinters. Marzo loses the amulet yet again, and is reverted back to his old decrepit form. And that's it for him, though Mekaneck himself gets one more notable appearance worth mentioning. In Second Skin, Mekaneck joins He-Man, Teela, and Man-at-Arms to take on King Hiss and his Snake Men, who are after a powerful artifact called the Serpent's Ring. Once Hiss gets his hands on it, he turns all of He-Man's buddies, including Mekaneck, into Snake Men. And while Man-at-Arms and Teela basically look like greener, scalier versions of themselves, Mekaneck's transformation is quite striking and apt, with his snake-like neck making him look like the snakiest of men. Thankfully, once He-Man destroys the ring by launching it into the sun, I mean, how else would you destroy an artifact that powerful? Everyone reverts back to normal. And that's pretty much all worth mentioning about Mekaneck in 2000X, because shortly after King Hiss's defeat, the series itself was unceremoniously cancelled after just 2 seasons. Too bad we didn't get an extension on that show. And speaking of extensions, if you're enjoying this video, when you're done, why don't you go ahead and watch another one, and another, and another. Extended watch time is apparently the best way to help channels like mine out. So if you've got the time, stretch out your watch, or just keep me playing in the background while you go about your day. Help Stories from Grayskull periscope its way up the algorithm, one watched video at a time. That being said, any way you choose to help is very much appreciated, so thank you. Now, while 2000X unfortunately came to an end, Masters of the Universe pushed on to its next major chapter, not with a new series or even at the toy aisles, but online, through the subscription-based Masters of the Universe Classics line. We'll get to the toys themselves a little later, but for now I want to focus on the bio that came packaged with the Classics Mekaneck figure. The folks behind Classics, led by brand manager Scott Knightlick, set out to build one single cohesive continuity, pulling from everything that came before. The mini-comics, Filmation, 2000X, all of it. And while some of those unification choices ended up being pretty polarizing with fans, Mekaneck's wasn't one of them, at least not as far as I was concerned. According to the card, Mekaneck's real name is Urias, an individual seriously injured in the Battle of Avion during a planet-wide conflict called the Great Unrest. To save his life, he's brought by Man-at-Arms, Duncan, to Castle Grayskull, where the sorceress heals him. Her spell replaces his neck with an ever-expanding mechanical construction made of microscopic nanites. And by consciously increasing or decreasing the nanite count in his body, Urias gains the ability to grow his neck to almost unlimited length. It's also worth noting that a few years later, this origin was expanded even further in later Masters of the Universe reference material, based on the Classics continuity. According to the expanded story, Urias is gravely wounded not only in the Battle of Avion, but while fighting the pre-Skeletor villain Keldor. His commander orders a battlefield robot named C2 to rescue the fallen soldier, but the machine refuses, calculating that the mission would likely result in its own destruction. And so, left with no other choice, the commander carries Arias to safety himself. Once they're back behind friendly lines, Duncan dismantles C2 and removes its extending neck mechanism and uses its technology to reconstruct Arias' shattered neck, suggesting that Mekaneck's greatest gift ultimately came from the sacrifice, or perhaps the dismantling, of another mechanical being. Although if you ask me, that selfish bot deserved it. Anyway, taking on the codename Spyman, just kidding, Mekaneck, he becomes the Royal Guard's premier espionage asset, using that same amazing periscope neck to spy on the enemy, and apparently the occasional headbutt when the situation calls for it. Which I think makes a nice complement to Ram Man, where Ram Man's your big, indiscriminate, knock everyone down kind of impact, Mekaneck's more the precise, selective, I'm only headbutting you specifically type. But I digress. That head-on approach was on full display in 2026's live-action Masters of the Universe movie, where Mekaneck made the short but esteemed list of heroic warriors who actually made the cut. Played by James Wilkinson, we finally get to see Mekaneck in live-action form, and yeah, while he's basically a side character in the movie, he gets to show off his neck-stretching ability more than once, in all its glory. Worth noting, while they got most of the visual cues fairly accurate, he no longer has his iconic geometric-shaped helmet, which takes some getting used to, but it's ultimately still cool, because just like in 2000X, he looks awesome using his neck not to spy on the enemy, but to take multiples of them down at once. Definitely a power not to be ashamed of, and as a bonus, he didn't get turned into mulch. Sorry, Mossman. So at the end of the day, what exactly is Mekaneck's lasting legacy in a franchise built almost entirely around raw physical power? He's not the strongest master, not the flashiest, and some would argue not even the coolest ability-wise, and he knows it. Everyone's got insecurities, even a master of the universe apparently, and yet in the end, Mekaneck just literally keeps his head up and fights. And it's not just an insecurity thing either. Go all the way back to where his story actually started. A father who lost his son in a storm, and instead of giving up, spent years using that same neck to keep looking. Whether it's grief or self-doubt dragging him down, the answer's always the same. He doesn't stop. He holds his head up. And maybe that's a bit of a stretch, pun intended, but I think that's exactly why Mekaneck matters. He represents positivity in the middle of doubt. His whole ability is a literal metaphor for rising above the knockout gas, trying to keep you down. Which is also why Marzo makes the perfect foil for him. Marzo is a manipulator, the guy who preys on people who doubt themselves, who exploits grief, who waits for someone to break. And those people are out there in real life. Mekaneck's story, plain and simple, is a reminder to stop, look, listen, and think. To take a step back and not just identify the threats in your life, but recognize your own talents that you can use to deal with them. Reconnaissance matters. Intelligence matters. Seeing the battlefield clearly is just as valuable as dominating it. Knowing where the danger is before it finds you is its own kind of heroism. That, to me, is Mekaneck, a surprisingly positive thematic thread buried in a toy whose entire gimmick is the head goes up. And since we've mentioned it, let's talk toys. After the OG figure released in 1984, the next plastic version of Mekaneck came in 2002 as part of the toy line for the 2000X series. Aside from the hyper-detailed anime-inspired redesign, the figure kept the classic twist the waist to extend the neck gimmick intact. It also added a hollow head so that you could actually see through the visor for your own reconnaissance ops. And since the neck gimmick meant the OG Mekaneck missed out on the power punch feature like most other figures, they brought one back here too, the spring-loaded elbow on the mace arm that you could pull back and release to snap forward in an attack. Now, 2 years into the next toy line, Masters of the Universe Classics in 2010, we got a bit of a surprise release, someone we were not expecting at all, let alone before Mechaneck. And that was good old Count Marzo himself, the first ever action figure of this dastardly dude. And thankfully it was based on his more menacing 2000X design and not the hoity-toity aristocrat from Filmation. Then in 2012 it was finally Mechaneck's turn to debut in classic style. Unfortunately, the whole auto-raising neck gimmick was ditched entirely. To be fair, in order to give these figures excellent paint apps and accessories, most action features got dropped across the whole line. Fortunately, Mattel gave us a smart alternative: swappable neck segments. A basic one, roughly matching the height of the OG toy, would have been enough for most of us. But they went the extra mile with an additional, extra long neck option, which is quite awesome. Anyway, in 2023, it was back to basics with Mattel's Origins line, the OG figure now with more articulation, packed in with the vintage vehicle Road Ripper, now the Ground Ripper. But despite emulating the original figure closely, this version doesn't have the neck-raising gimmick either, going the classics route instead with a swappable extended neck accessory. The following year, we got two more Mechanecks. First, the more straightforward Masterverse New Eternia Mechaneck, Mattel's own modern take on the character, now also armed with a new snazzy Road Ripper inspired shield. This version came with not one, not two, but 5 individual neck segments, giving him both added height and neck articulation. And an extra cool gimmick is that if you're not using any of those segments to extend his neck, you can use them to extend his weapon. Mechaneck is also reimagined here as the captain of King Randor's submarine squadron, a fitting new spin for the human periscope if you ask me. And speaking of reimagining, I give you this dude. Now I'll admit I'm not well versed enough in Ninja Turtles lore to know exactly which TMNT character this Mechaneck crossover is meant to be paired with, but the design's cool regardless. Reworked as a snake hunting spy, geared up for reptile wars. I guess this version didn't really appreciate getting turned into a snake man by King Hiss back in 2000X. And finally, in 2026, we got a live-action movie Mechaneck for the basic core line. Solid articulation, a couple of neck segments, and a blaster. Just enough for the kiddies. But a little too basic for me, which is why I'm glad Mattel's already announced a Mechaneck for their Chronicles line, aimed at us oldies. Details are still sparse, but from the SDCC display, it looks like this one's getting something no other Mechaneck figure has had before. A long, bendy plastic neck, giving him real flexibility while still keeping that clean, cohesive look. And speaking of cohesive, I think it's safe to say there's no consistent, cohesive look shared between any of these guys. But hey, you know what they say, evil comes in all sorts of shapes and sizes. If you want to know more about these bad dudes, Spikor, Karg, Goatman, and Pig Boy, and what they all have in common, I've got their story here. Or if you want to see my latest video, I've got that over here. Either way, thanks for watching, and I hope to hear from you in the comments below. Go ahead and tell me your story.